Welcome to Nav Chat, the show for the New Zealand orienteering and navigation sports community. Cool, Tom. Nice to do Nav Chat in person.
Yeah, bit of a change.
Yeah, thanks for having me to your house in Hamilton.
No worries.
Cool.
We've got an exciting looking show this month. We've got a couple of things to talk about. We're going to be focusing on adventure racing nav, which is a little bit different, and that includes a bit of night navigation as well.
Yeah.
Relevant in March every year because topo, the only real night orienteering we have in New Zealand. And of course, as we always do, we're going to do a little bit of a coaching piece and then share some news from around the country. You caught up with a guest as well.
Yeah, I did. It's been a good month of GODzone. So I caught up with Scott Macdonald, who was racing with Team Motueka.
I saw Scotty a few times out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he had one kind of experience on GODzone. It was not the greatest experience, and keen to contrast that with other people's experience. I've also done a podcast with two of the guys from iSport who had a great race to get second place.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, and you were also out there with Ataraxia.
Yeah.
So what was the whole team, Ataraxia? Is it slightly different to previous years?
Yeah, a little bit. So this year we had myself and Matt Jeans. We've raced together many times, and Hannah Lowe, who, again, have raced with lots. Did XPD in Australia with her and have also done lots of 12 and 24s. And then we had, this year, the big revelation for us really was Sean Palmer, a young...
I don't know Sean.
He's a bit younger. He's 23. He's out of Taranaki, that kind of production line of adventure races they have over there, though not from New Plymouth Boys High.
Okay.
From Francis Douglas. He, kind of on the word of the guys who organised the Motueka Munta, they said, you should get Sean in your team.
Right.
When they heard we had a vacancy, so we did.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was wicked. He made a big difference. Cool. He is a class act, I must say.
Wow.
He actually, as it worked out, we worked on the nav together. It was, I'll be able to talk about this a bit more when we flick up a map, but it was really interesting navigating with someone who has a quite fundamentally different navigation style from me.
Cool.
I think to summarise it, we were talking about, we're using a lot of bearings at one point, which I'll talk about a bit more, but Sean was like, how do you do bearings, Tom? And I was kind of like, well, I guess I could just kind of vibe them. I think that's a hangover from orienteering, where we have our thumb compass. We don't have to worry about declination. We kind of just can like look in the terrain and see where we're going. It also made me realise that I rely a lot on other detail to help correct my bearing as I'm going. Yeah. Whereas Sean, rock solid on a bearing. He could do a bearing in the middle of the night through the thickest bush and would be right on.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and maybe if we were forced to practice that more, we'd get better at that. But certainly when I'm orienteering, I'm focused on the contours quite a lot. And so you could argue I'm not actually training my bearings quite as much as you'd need to for some of this adventure navigation stuff, where focusing more on these vague contours is not going to help you as much as they might on a well-mapped sand dune area, for example, where there's lots of nice details and you can see far into the forest. So yeah,
definitely.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Shall we talk about some specific examples from the map? We can pull it up and have a look.
Yeah, let's get into the map.
All right. So this is stage 4. This is the rogaine. I think Scott talks a bit more about the general structure of the race in his talk coming up next, but he also talks about this area as well. And I thought I'd just share a bit of what we did. So first of all, in the lead up, we were super lucky. We did training out here, and we actually, in an armchair set exercise, we had a control that was within the circle for CP16, so just on the end of the track. We had another control which was on the 0.600, just there, and we had another one just directly south of there. There's like a saddle, just a little bit, just about here. Yeah. So we'd kind of been in the terrain and we knew what it was like, which was really helpful. But just as you'll hear from Scott, we hit this leg, like we put our headlights on just as we started heading off the road from the start and made our way down to 16. Now this was interesting for GODzone because it was a rogaine stage. You could choose, you only had to get 7 out of the 9 points. So I know there was a lot of discussion. I haven't actually seen a map or anything drawn up of where everyone went, but some of the
maybe I can tell you where some people went based on the tracking.
Okay.
But I can tell you it was well planned because there wasn't a strong consensus about which ones to do and which ones to not do. So kudos to the planners for getting that balance right, I think. But there were some suspicions coming from a navigation perspective of mine that some things would be really tough to do at nighttime and others would be the safer options to take at nighttime. So I'm interested to see if your intuition around those things is similar to mine.
So I can tell you our initial plan. Our initial plan was to go to A. We'd actually already basically been there in training.
Yeah.
But to go to A, go to C, skip B, just because by getting up to C, you basically get on a highway that is that ridge line round to D. Then from D, follow the ridge line again round to E. So we probably would have gone north of it and taken a slightly longer route, but hung to the ridge. Then we were going to go to F, over to G, up to I, and that was to be our plan.
Oh, yeah.
We wanted a control that we would miss near the end, just to give us a bit of margin for error in case something unexpected happened. But as it turned out, we broke the cardinal rule of orienteering and rogaining, in that we changed our plan out there. So we got A, B, C, D, and we found it really challenging at night to hold the ridge line from C to D. It was doable, we made it, but what I think this topo map doesn't really show, and especially at nighttime, when you dropped off high points, typically when you're in the forest, you can kind of tell when you're on a spur and when you're not. Hills will typically elongate a little bit out to the spur, the vegetation will be a little bit different, and you can identify when you're heading that way. But that was not the case here. We were struggling, and it was really, that came down to bearings. Basically, Sean would jump on a bearing, and then we'd sort of head that way, and I'd ferret around, trying to make the contours work. So we thought that whole D through E looks real tricky with lots of direction change, lots of high points. So we scratched E and instead went to F. And our thought had been, the rivers haven't been too bad so far. So we'll get H, then shoot all the way up to G, and then get I. We got H, no worries. Went back down, started back up the stream, and it had already been pretty slow. But this was super slow. This was really hard going. This would have been about an hour that we were going up there. And then we got to approximately this area here, as it turned out, and we got super twitchy. We hadn't really identified the creeks we'd been past. So we punched up here to this high point, and then punched down here, and then down to the control. And thank goodness it was there, because we were starting to get pretty nervous by that point. Well, I was.
Yeah.
And then from there we just were straight back up, round to I, and we came along the top and then dropped in, probably through this gut, which was super steep, but then got 17. We were pretty put off by how slow the river travel had been compared to this, which might be in direct contrast to what Scotty was doing.
Yeah, they definitely noticed that. Well, we'll hear him talk about it more, but a number of people noticed that river was really tough going up to G, and it's a bit of bad luck. I think you do the most with the map you've got given, and you guys dealt with the surprises, I think, in a reasonably constructive way. You sought safety, sought confidence.
Yeah, I think a big thing for us in here was trying to find handrails that worked for us. We could use our I guess my orienteering background, I wanted to use the terrain and find terrain handrails. But with Sean's bearing skills, we essentially had another handrail, and that we could use straight lines of bearings.
That's pretty cool.
I think massive takeaway for me from this is that I think my weakness in orienteering bearings is just, you can mask it on an orienteering course, but you cannot in terrain like this. So I think that's what winter training is going to be.
So where's the rubber meeting the road for him? Is he super disciplined when the vegetation gets tough and just drops the shoulder and goes through? Or is it frequency, looking at the compass needle more often?
I don't know. I mean, during this in the middle of the night probably wasn't the time for me to get a bit of coaching on it. But I need to sit down with him and actually get a bit of insight on it. He was he did check it often, but he was also just very good at like sensing if we were diverting left or right. Terrain like this, you often have little like lines that you might have your eye drawn to, but when you're trying to follow a bearing, sometimes it's actually faster just to take on whatever comes. So I think that was probably part of it too. Cool. The other sting in the tail for this league was the climb out of 17. Like you think, great course setting. You think you're through it, out of the woods. You've done the tricky part, but then you've actually got quite a significant climb and a little bit of navigation to get to the TA. So as it turned out, the spur that runs from 17 had a hunting track on it, which was sprayed with pink dazzle, and that went all the way around, kind of hooked to that little small high point, and then it kind of stopped. So when we got there were not a lot of signs of people and not a lot of signs of really any more markers. There were a few little pieces of tape tied up, but you had to get back on your compass again. And if you were tired, maybe you're at the other end of the day and you're heading into the night, that last little K is actually really complicated. Looks easy, but a real sting in the tail. So yeah, excellent course setting.
Cool. Sweet. One comment from me is that I think what you ended up executing is what I saw a lot of the top teams doing, except a number of top teams decided not to do E from the get-go, and that was also my choice as a spectator.
What would you have gone for?
What was to miss B and to miss E. And the reason I would like to miss E, and have a little look closer, is the approach from D is ambiguous. It's hard to know where you come over this middle ridge, this middle.
There's that really unfortunately placed 500 meter label on the contour there, which just takes a bit of information out for you.
Yeah. And I could see there's a chance for E to end up on the hill to the north or the hill to the south.
Yeah.
And be totally screwed and not know which one you're on. Whereas I really like going from F to H because you can follow left-right rules in a very black and white fashion and get from one control to the other. Likewise to G. Okay, it was tough, but from a planning perspective, you can follow black and white rules.
Yeah.
Much like I, up to the ridgeline, follow ridgeline until control.
Yeah.
Whereas E, there's a chance you get onto the wrong hill and not know.
Handrails, right? And we're going to talk about this a bit later after we hear from Scotty.
Yep.
Shall we chuck him on?
Yes.
Good to see you, man. How's things?
Great. Thanks for coming on Nav Chat. Tom and I are keen to hear from some different people who have had different experiences at GODzone. I've just done a podcast with Simone and Theo, who they had a pretty good time. They had a pretty good time at.
Yeah, they had a great time.
And yeah, we need to round off all the different kinds of experiences that people had.
Absolutely.
And we were really enjoying following you guys, and we were pretty impressed with how your team was going. And then you stopped, and then poof, then you were gone. Then you were gone. So let's build up to that point. And how many adventure races have you done in the past, and what's been your sporting focuses over the past few?
I've just done the one adventure race in the past, which was 2 or 3 years ago now in Portugal. Me and Theo Wisworth actually went and did a race over there it was actually with Team Motueka, who I raced with the GODzone. Cool. And that went really well, and had a really good experience there. Had a wicked time traveling over there, and we managed to win that race. So my first experience was actually a really good experience. So I thought, how much harder can GODzone be? That'll be good. And my focus has been coast to coast the last few years, basically. And I love doing that race, and I think it lends itself quite well to adventure racing. At least that was my sort of impression. So yeah, I thought I'd been thinking about GODzone for a few years, I guess, but never quite committed to it. And thought now is probably a good time. So yeah, gave it a crack this year, and was keen to race with Brent again, the guy who's in charge of Team Motueka. He does an awesome job, and he was keen to have me on board after our good experience in Portugal. So Managed to round up a couple of others and
Cool.
thought what could possibly go wrong.
Sweet. What was your thoughts on the course once you were given the maps?
I was excited actually, because it went through a lot of areas that I was quite familiar with, I guess. Either areas that I'd been to for adventures or looked at on topo maps and sort of planned on going to. I mean, like going down to the Kawekas, for example, was, I grew up in Hawke's Bay, so doing stuff through the Kawekas was kind of my backyard in a way. Plus a lot of the stuff around Rotorua, I've done plenty of mountain biking through the redwoods and around the lakes and Tarawera and all sorts. So a lot of it was, it was like quite familiar. So that was kind of cool. It went further south than I expected. I didn't think it would go across the Napier Taupo Road, probably like a lot of people thought. I thought it would be more in the Uruwetas. So but it was cool to see. It wasn't just going to be bush bashing through the Uruwetas. There was a bit of a something slightly different as well. So pretty cool.
Cool. Did you like the navigation elements in the course?
Yeah, I actually found it more challenging than expected. Obviously, we've both come from the orienteering background, and so I've kind of always thought of GODzone kind of navigation as and topo nav as not being that difficult, I guess, compared to normal orienteering. But I was, it was a bit of a reality check, to be honest. Some of the bush nav, I found quite tricky, and we're pretty lucky to have sort of a last minute ring in with Greg Hamilton, who you probably know as well from orienteering, and he's quite experienced with adventure racing and rogaining. So he's actually, he was an awesome guy to come in on board only a week and a half, 2 weeks before the race. We were really lucky with him, and we shared the navigation, me and Greg, but when it got tough at night in the bush, when I was actually struggling a bit more than expected, he often sort of took charge, and he was awesome. He was really, really good. Is this our route that's coming up now, is it?
So this isn't your route exactly, but the corners of this line are where the control points are. Yeah. So this is the map you were using, and this is the kind of navigation most people were doing at nighttime, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was the same as us. We got in sort of halfway to that first control up by the lake when it went dark, and the rest of it was at night, and we basically finished just as the day was breaking. So it was a long night.
Yeah, and what's the forest like there?
It's varied at times along the ridges. It's actually not too bad. It's you can sort of move okay, but then as you get off the ridges and down into along some of the streams, it's really overgrown. I'd say mostly quite overgrown with a few bits that were not so bad. The first sort of streams we came across were actually really nice. So we went down, we decided quite early on to use the streams because they're nice and obvious, and the ridges can be quite vague. And they were really nice travel at first in the streams, but it didn't stay like that the whole way. They got pretty overgrown at times. It was a pretty challenging stage, to be honest.
Yeah, it looked pretty tough, and we could see some interesting things happen on the GPSs. A few people drifting down some of the streams too far, and a few people you can't really see what they're doing, but they don't move very far for an hour or two.
Yes, and sometimes
up and down, like a bit lost, really confused. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, obviously doing it at night is always tricky. I always find looking at the map, you kind of don't quite realize, I guess, like on the map, I remember planning it out with Greg the day before when we got the maps, and we thought, okay, let's just go from this one to this one to this one. We'll follow along this ridge, and then we'll come down to the stream junction. But it was much trickier actually doing it. Due to the bush being thicker and the ridge lines being harder to follow than expected, particularly if you'd come off a peak and try to go down a particular ridge. It could be really vague at first and hard to actually find the ridge if you're trying to hit a saddle or something like that. It was So it took a lot of we took a lot of care, I guess, and were very slow at times, just trying to be sure with our nav.
So what kind of things are you looking for to help give you some more confidence and some certainty in those situations?
To be honest, I'm looking to Greg a lot in those kind of situations, but technically, I guess where obviously the hilltops are relatively obvious, so use those, and the streams themselves were generally pretty good. So those were kind of the two key sort of features we really used. So on a couple of the legs, we'd go off the line a wee bit, and purposely to try and hit a stream and then follow down that stream, follow along it. So for example, I think it was C to D, I think it was, which is that sort of the longest one, just a bit further north of where you are now, I think, down to that one going to that 750 sort of point there. Yeah. So that was that was yes, that's the one there. So we thought just follow along the ridge lines, but then following along that ridge is actually much trickier. Particularly, we have to then cut west there and try and connect to the next ridge line. That's quite tricky. So we actually went down to the stream, to the west there, and then rather than go down the ridge, we down to the stream, then up the stream, and then
like the stream and then up.
No. I mean, even from the control, we went.
Oh, okay.
More sort of southwest.
Yeah.
Down to that stream, I think it was.
Okay. And up that one, or then crossed over.
And then we crossed up to that ridge, then just above it. Yeah, and then down to the next stream.
Yeah.
And then up that and follow that stream pretty much the whole way up. And then popped up from there. Yeah, and
that's quite interesting, because you are trying to find some sense of confidence in this forest, and otherwise you're paralyzed. And
exactly. It surprised me how much, I guess, with Greg, he was willing to lose height or gain extra height that typically wouldn't have thought we'd needed, but just to get that certainty.
As an orienteer, you cringe at those inefficiencies, but
exactly,
and at nighttime you do not want to be stuffing around.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So he was great in some of that sort of decision making.
How did you find the rest of the course, the mountain biking, the Nav's fairly straightforward with the mountain biking, or are there some things that you have to consider?
No, with the mountain biking, it was all pretty straightforward, really. That was fun. I'm like being on the bike and sort of one of my strengths, I guess. So that was fine. The only real tricky navigation was I found that rogaine, and then before the pack raft down the Motueka, and there that was quite more. It was much more challenging than we'd expected.
Okay, so it looks like there's a trail most of the way.
Yes, there is. Yeah, it's getting to the track in the first place. That was the challenging part.
Up in here. So okay, yeah.
From the transition,
that's pretty loose.
Yeah, it's only a short section, and again, like when we're planning it, it looks fairly straightforward. But but particularly, I mean, from you can sort of see where the clearing is at about that 1,000-meter contour.
Yeah,
around there, that was particularly vague and tricky through there, and we seemed to spend forever bush bashing there and getting absolutely nowhere. It was incredibly frustrating. Honestly, I think we went a very similar route to that one there that's showing, but it was apparently there were some tracks marked, like some trappers. Tracks, which we didn't find until right near the very end, and it would have made things a hell of a lot easier, but instead we spent a couple of hours bashing around going almost nowhere, which is
pretty frustrating and quite mentally draining at that stage in the race, when you're getting tired and it's just so frustrating, just bashing away and I'm not getting anywhere.
Exactly, particularly because we had planned on getting to the end of this trek before the pack raft and getting there sometime in the early hours of the morning and being able to sleep, because you can't paddle the river at night. So, but it ended up taking us the whole night we didn't arrive at the start of the river until 8 o'clock in the morning. So then we didn't get the sleep that we'd sort of thought we might get. So it was a bit tough.
Cool. Well, let's talk about the trek a little bit. This looks very daunting. Like, this is a long trek.
Yeah, it is a long trek. I suppose you sort of break it down into little bite-sized chunks as you go. But yeah, this was where I started to have some ankle trouble. I had it earlier on, but this is where it started to really flare up. So, but again, like, the navigation wasn't tough at all, really. Certainly for the parts that we did of it. I mean, most of the time you're following tramping tracks, a lot of which I'd sort of been on before. So that was quite comfortable. It was just, the daunting part was just the physical side of it. A lot of up and down. And we crossed the first big ridge line going into the night, just as it was getting dark. And going through to, I don't know, midnight. Must be, the first.
It's that first series of tops.
Yes, to the that's right. Yeah, across that the first range there, out in the open, and it was bitterly cold. Like, they told us before the race that it could get cold out on the tops, and it was, we had a cold wind, and there's no shelter up there, and it was freezing. It was really, really cold. Like, one of our teammates, Fiona, got just incredibly cold, and we sort of put up with it. Got down to the bush line, and she couldn't even talk. At the end of that, she was so cold. Like, we had to basically get her changed and, help her get changed and help her with a bunch of stuff, because she was just like, couldn't operate, so cold. So, it's sort of surprising, because you think up Bay of Plenty, Rotorua area, this time of year, temperatures are pretty nice. It's pretty warm, but it got cold. It got really cold. It was challenging.
Cool. And how did the rest of this trek go?
It was, navigationally fine, not really a worry. We made it through to it was probably almost 2/3 of the way through, I guess. This is obviously where we started slowing down. Just with, my ankle was just getting more and more painful. Just the tendon at the front of my ankle, to the point where every step, every step was painful, and we were just going slower and slower, and painkillers and whatnot weren't really helping much. So it's kind of frustrating. And that's just you have to rely on your team a wee bit, and so offload my pack to them, and take the walking poles just for me to use, and it feels very selfish and you feel a bit hopeless, but it's just the nature of team racing, I guess. So, it's very humbling, I suppose. Feeling like you're pretty fit and pretty strong, and did coast to coast a few weeks before, and that went really well. And and it's just a slightly different style of racing, I guess, and a lot of carrying weight in the packs, which is something I'm not so used to. So I think we had quite a bit of weight early on and paid for it later. So it's just the way it goes sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then, so how did you guys wrap it up?
So we got actually to the Mangamingi Saddle, which is on the map there, just to the right a little bit. And for me, just the pain was getting worse and worse every step, just like a stabbing pain, basically. And my other ankle started to play up as well. So it was,
and you're just doing damage by that stage.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's hard to know, because adventure racing, there's a lot of pretty tough people in the sport, and the kind of attitude is typically like, you just, it's a team race and you want the team to finish, so you deal with it, you man up and you deal with the pain and get through it. And that's what I tried to do, I guess, for the previous few days. And if it was just me racing solo, I would have pulled out a couple of days earlier probably, but you push on, because it's a team thing and everyone puts a lot into it, so you want the team to finish. But so we got up to Mangamingi Saddle just before dark, and I sort of said to the team, guys, I don't think I can finish the trek, because it was the rate we were going would have been another day and a half, probably more, just up and down with ankle getting worse and worse and us getting slower and slower. And I don't know, at that point, it was probably a bit too much. So yeah, we slept on it for the night, saw how the ankle was in the morning, had a nice 8 or 9 hour sleep maybe. Really uncomfortable in a tiny little 2-man tent with 4 of us on some hard ground. But yeah, and then in the morning the ankle was the same, if not worse. So we contacted the event organisation and they eventually sent a chopper in to pick us up, and we got choppered out.
Yeah, that was the end of the race. Nice. So, was that fun? Chopper? What was the weather like?
Oh, I mean, like, it's, I don't know. It's hard to say because you're gutted, obviously, that and I feel stink because it's because of the teams pulled out. So yeah, it's not a nice feeling. I mean, the chopper ride was cool and beautiful. You got to go over some of the course that we'd raced on, so it was quite cool to look out and see. But it's all tainted with the bad taste in the mouth, really. So
while we were following the race, we were at maybe halfway in, and there were still only a few withdrawals by that stage.
Yeah,
and I was thinking, wow, this is exceptional. When are teams going to start? This is a battle of attrition. So people don't finish. A massive chunk of the field won't finish. That's the whole. Exactly. That's why it is that hard. And sure enough, on the trek, just little people disappearing, popping away, and we're all gutted to see Team Motueka disappear from the map. But that is adventure racing, and you can't have something that's this challenging and this rewarding to finish without having such a chunk of people, such a big portion of the teams not finish. And you talk to all the top guys, and they've had many adventure races where they haven't finished for whatever reason. So congrats on your efforts, and we were all super excited to see a whole bunch of orienteers mixing it up. At the top.
Me too, man. I mean, it's a sport where I think a lot of orienteers can do quite well. Just need to practice running around or walking around with a big pack, and that's it'll be sweet. So no, thanks, man. It was it was a cool experience. Pretty tough and a bit brutal, but and not obviously the way we wanted it to finish. But we had a good team and some cool experiences. So not one I'll forget about, it's for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks for the time, Scott.
Sweet, no worries, mate.
It was interesting to hear from another team because it's so interesting out there. You are just in your own little bubble, and it was. I haven't had a chance to sit down with Scott and hear how they went. Bummer that they didn't finish, but sounds like they had some battles out there. We were pretty terrified that they were just going to come out of nowhere for most of the race.
Absolutely, they did have a strong team. And there were a number of other strong teams. In fact, you had quite a tussle also, which was really exciting to follow.
Yeah, but there's some orienteers no less with Sarah Prince and Tim Farrand. There was a moment when Tim popped out of some thick scrub, having made a break away from us, and we'd obviously just got back up to them. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but something about that's embarrassing or something. It was a funny odd comment. By that point, we'd spent about 24 hours back and forth with each other.
It was great watching, and there was a battle for second and third and fourth and fifth, and you guys were both tussling away for days. It was so cool to follow.
No. But I think it's really interesting here as well to hear Scott talk about how orienteering navigation doesn't, just because you're a good orienteer doesn't mean you're a good topo map navigator. And we were thinking, we were both thinking about this beforehand, and we thought that some of the things that do generalize are those base concepts of handrails and using them to find safety in the terrain. And you could see Greg and Scott used some handrails, myself and Sean used others. And maybe we should go through some examples in a more orienteering map kind of way.
Let's have a focus on using handrails at maybe an orange and red level.
Sweet, cool.
So fairly advanced, but hopefully we can distill it down to some of the basics now that we've seen what it might look like with rogaining. Let's contrast that with orienteering.
Cool. So where are we going?
Cool. So this is a map in Woodhill, quite far north in Woodhill, called White Lightning. And RIP White Lightning, it's been many years. but it was quite an interesting area because it's so flat in some parts of the map, and there's a lot of contour detail in others. But we want to talk about using handrails in this very orienteering specific concept. So do you want to
It's my favourite
start us
map.
off?
I miss it. It's such a good bit of terrain. Yes. So handrails here. There are some. This screen we've got up here illustrates a whole bunch of different really obvious ones. We've got the tracks. We've got the clearing. We've got the edge of some vegetation. All these things are going to be super obvious to you if you're either looking at the map because they stand out on colour, or if you're running in the terrain. The next most obvious ones are going to be the abrupt changes in the contours. So we have a large flat area which then runs into this one contour hill. That's going to be obvious. I mean, this area is so unique, it's so flat, and then you're going to run into something even though it's only one contour high, it's going to stand out. We've also got down further to the south, we've got an area which is got a big drop off. This area is going to be, again, really obvious. So you've got the contours to help you. These edges, you can find them throughout the terrain. And this is something you can get throughout Woodhill.
Yeah.
Do you spot any others?
Yeah, I think what you've noticed is the most obvious handrails, and I think the key here is to find ways to not be overwhelmed by the detail. And so we're off to a good start, and let's take that a step further, because at red level orienteering, the controls are not going to be on these nice red lines that I've drawn. They're not going to be on the edges of these areas, so they won't be directly on the handrails. So let's take our handrails a step further and look for the next level of subtleness.
Well, so if I look in here, I'm just looking around what I can see. I think high points, because we're thinking about visibility, we're thinking about running, we're thinking about safety, and you can't mistake high points. So within this block of detail, there's some fingers where there are little lines of high points that run together. One here, yep, another one just to the north. So these handrails are a little bit more tricky because they're curved, but if you can link up high points and you can kind of stay on the kind of spine of these hills, even though they're only 1 or 2 contours high, that gives you a really obvious point of safety. Also, the added benefit is that you get saddles and hilltops. So you get a whole bunch of point features that you can use as attack points along the way. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the correct observation, is that there are these ridges, and to notice that up front is the difference between going into a detailed area overwhelmed without a plan and going into a detailed area knowing what you're looking for in advance and being able to grab onto it as soon as you can see it.
So the whole concept of handrails finds its way not just from helping us along a leg, but also helping us into a control. We can find these more detailed, more fine handrails, and they can help lead us in.
That's right. So if you look at this area I've drawn up at the moment, there is not much of that block that is a high distance away from one of these red lines now. So just imagine that these red lines were tracks or paths in the forest. There are not many control sites in that block now that are far from one of these red lines. So once you've got the confidence with that, then there aren't many places that the course setter can put a control that you won't be able to string together some of these handrails to find a safe way to get to it.
Yeah. If we move down a little bit and we just go to that more detailed area with the clearings, the obvious temptation here is to try and use clearings to help with your navigation. Mm-hmm. This area, you think, great, I'm in a forest, clearing, it'll stand out. But what do you think? Would you use them?
Yeah, I think that's a trap. I think in this case, all of these clearings are indistinguishable from each other. The only way you know what clearing is what is based on the contours that it sits on. So we can cut straight to the chase and just look at the contours up front and ignore all of the clearings. So at first that might seem surprising, but from my experience, and I'm sure the experience of many other coaches in the orienteering space, it's about finding the things that you can connect together most reliably. And that might not be the colors that jump out at you at first, but we can practice this.
I think the same principle applies to this area as the area above it to the north. This has a little bit more contour detail, but it's also got the clearings. If you took the clearings away, you could just use high points again and find arcs of high points to create a whole network of handrails that you can then follow around through the terrain. It's tempting to want to use some of the big depressions, and you could say that those are usable, but I think that the safest thing to do here is to use the techniques you use in the rest of the map. Build handrails that are visible and safe in the ridges, and utilize them to get between the controls.
Yeah, absolutely. You really want to double down on your contour skills and cling on to these ridges. Maybe you're not running in a straight line, just like what we saw with the rogaine, how people were best to slide down to the river, follow the river along, and then head back up to the ridgeline. Just like, you could do the same on this. If you're heading across this block and you're overwhelmed by the contours, then just cling on to these things and don't take the straight path, but take the confident path.
Cool. Okay, so good summary. We've got nationals coming up. It's going to be in sand dunes. Think about handrails, use them for safety, and remember, they're not just roads, they can be more subtle things in the terrain. You just need to be a bit creative and find them.
Absolutely. And if you're finding this challenging, then this is the crux of the step up from orange to red level orienteering. So it is challenging. Everyone knows that this is challenging, and to take on red level orienteering with confidence, I think this is where your training efforts should be, mastering handrails and contours.
Cool. Should we catch some news from around the country?
Yep.
So news-wise, we can start with something international. We do have some orienteers from New Zealand overseas. One of them is obviously Tim Robertson. And while it's not orienteering, Tim laid down a pretty fast 10K this last week, 29:43.
Yeah, that's a great time, and this is a time that Tim's really happy with. And given his silver medal at World Champs in the past, I think he's got to be a hot contender for future medals at World Champs coming up. He's still getting faster and faster, and yeah, this is exciting. I'm really looking forward to him doing an all sprint walk, which is on the cards now. So yeah, go Tim.
Be interesting to see. A bit closer to home, and again some fast runners. We had University of Canterbury Orienteering Club had their fairly casual training camp out in Fairlie. They looked like they were running some pretty cool trainings, using some real classic old maps. This topo map, it's always stumped me, this one. A mix of clearings, relatively vague contour detail, but they looked like they had some good fun exercises going, and with GPS too.
Yeah, this is great. They're using GPS and they're mass starting, so the pressure's on. The quality of training I think we're seeing coming out of UCOC is fantastic. They've got a really good buzz going on down there. So if you're choosing your university based on the orienteering action that's happening, then these guys are putting on a pretty good case. Nice one, Canterbury.
Back up in Auckland, we had the Lactic Turkey Rogaine schools sprint series has started up again. I'm always impressed by how many people there are at these events. I know we used to do summer series back in our day, but just so many people making it along to orienteering during the week.
Yeah, it's cool. I remember the main attraction being taking the day off school to go orienteering, but this is not. That cannot explain what's happening here. There are a lot of kids turning up in after school hours to do orienteering, and they getting stuck in, and they start them all off all in a big pack, close together, and they've got a wave leaving every minute on all the courses, and there's just so many kids out in the school at the same time. It's just so cool to see that level of interest in orienteering. Yeah, it was small when we were doing this.
Not the only place around the country that school orienteering is happening, but good to see it's happening in Auckland despite the recent COVID lockdowns. Other news moving more to the centre of the country, the Wairarapa Orienteering Club apparently is rising from the dead, or they've had a quiet few years, but apparently have had some summer events on, and I've had some pretty cool trips down to the Wairarapa for orienteering. We've got Hapua wetlands up here. Classic map.
This is a classic Wairarapa map, and I've raced here a number of times before and done a lot of training here. And they've got a lot of steep areas with some interesting contours. They've got some pine forest out there as well. And yeah, this is great to see.
This was national relays last time when Nationals was in Masterton, maybe 2008. This was where Nationals relay was. Good terrain.
Cool.
And then I guess the big news this month, everyone's going to be getting ready for Nationals at Easter.
So yeah, let's talk about Nationals. I can't give away too much because I'm of course involved with the long distance specifically as an organizer, but also kind of being on the sidelines enough with the other events that I won't give away too much. Nothing that's not in the bulletin.
All right.
I can promise they're going to be tough and a lot of fun.
So then, if we can't give away too much, what would you say? What about what's your number one technique tip for the Nationals weekend? We've talked about handrails, and we've said that that's going to be an important way to be a safe navigator. But is there anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a theme of resilience might come out of the weekend because there's a lot of very challenging areas going to be thrown at people. And I think sticking to one particular technique the whole way through is going to fail. There's going to be surprises thrown at you the whole way through. And especially with the long distance, there's a lot of different styles I think will be necessary to do well in this terrain.
Okay.
And a lot of things are not going to go well.
So by resilience, do you mean someone who can respond to changes?
Yeah, I think respond to changes and respond to frustrations in a constructive way. The terrain is tough, and a lot of it's detailed, and a lot of it's less detailed. And you're always going to be able to find somewhere in this terrain that's not your style, that doesn't suit you. And if that breaks you, then it's going to make the rest of the race really tough. And I think the same can be said for the other races. There's always going to be some part of the race that is not your style.
Interesting. Okay, maybe I need to go and do some training on my bearings for next weekend.
Yeah, your training on everything will be tested.
Cool. Looking forward to it. Well, we will be back after Nationals, and we can maybe do a debrief of a couple of the courses.
Yeah. For sure. We'll be able to get right into it after Nationals, and maybe there'll be more events around the country have kicked off by that stage that we can look into a lot more maps.
Cool. Talk to you then.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
No worries.
If you liked the show, please support it by sharing this podcast with one person who would benefit from it. The best place to find more content like this is at genebeveridge.nz, where you can find years of training blogs, race reports, podcasts, and coaching videos. If you don't want to miss future episodes, I recommend subscribing to my newsletter by visiting genebeveridge.nz or by following on social media, Perfect Flow on Facebook and Gene Beveridge on Instagram. For Q&A, send messages to nav@perfectflow.nz.